Welcome to Generation Digital Workforce, the podcast that's here to explore the role of robotic process automation and other digital technologies. Whether you're just getting started or you're looking for advanced strategies and tactics, if you're curious about where human and digital workers are coming together to transform the future of work, then this podcast is for you. All right, let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome this week to Generation Digital Workforce. This is Zena, and I'm coming at you from Austin. Today, I have with me John Ford from Robiquity, and he is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing great, Zena. How about yourself?
I'm doing well myself. Where are you at these days?
I am sheltering in Dallas, Texas. I've been in Dallas
sounds
here
good.
for over 20 years.
Oh, a fella's a Texan. I love that.
Not from here. Got here as fast as I could.
That's what all transplants say. So I love it. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been in sales, marketing, go-to-market, and sales ops for about 30 years in the technology space, covering everything from hardware, software, to services. I actually was first exposed to RPA back in 2012. I helped the company basically put their whole go-to-market strategy, working with another partner doing the deployment, on how to leverage it in a proprietary solution in the market, both internally to gain value out of business and externally.
All right, 2012, love it, bringing some experience to us.
Yeah, and I've stayed with it all along. Well, I've tracked this industry for a long time.
It's a very fun industry. I joined it in January of 2018, and it has been, dare I say, a roller coaster ride since I joined, and a fun one. So I'm really digging it, shall I say? So I want to jump right in and talk with you a little bit about the trends that you see impacting the digital workforce today. Having been in it for a while, I'm sure you have perspectives that our audience would benefit from hearing.
I do. And as a matter of fact, some of it ties very well to where we stand as a firm, and that's some of the challenges around enablement. I actually joined Robiquity because of addressing this common challenge of how do I basically look beyond deploying a few processes and actually scale and sustain my own business model as an owner of RPA versus handing the keys over to everybody else. And some of the challenges I'm seeing in particular is, obviously RPA had its roots working in the area of finance and banking, but even in the corporate world, I've really seen it relegated to finance, HR, and the call center. And what's ironic to me is that when you collect these processes centrally, they really aren't a program. A program really requires getting an entire line of business on board, which was one of the reasons that I was attracted even back in 2018 when I started with a firm where we deployed CRM solutions. I saw a clear need for basically RPA playing in the lead to cash space. And the good news about the trends is that I'm seeing more discussion around that. Unfortunately, a lot of it's still focused more on the call center activity, engaging with the customer. I mean, there is some upselling in that space, but really where I see the opportunities and where folks are starting to talk about it now is in the area of, how do I quickly get leads, which can come from everything from a trade show to other types of documents into the CRM or a different tool that I'm using. How do I manage the product catalog when I basically do quoting? And then finally, some bigger pieces is how do I get the information I need into these multiple systems. And what I mean by that is as a salesperson, typically per opportunity, and this was based on a Gartner report, what we see is a lot of times the average person is dealing with about 8 different systems as a sales rep per opportunity and about 5 different folks in the enterprise to get things approved, such as contracts, et cetera. So you can obviously see that takes an inordinate amount of time walking around, and RPA clearly fits that space well and pulling all that information together and giving it to me in one place, and more importantly, disseminating that information accurately. Because as a salesperson, we get busy. We like to skip steps when we're given a lot of fields and forms to fill out. So that's where I really see a strong trend.
So what's holding companies back from doing that today?
Well, I think for the most part, I'll go back to what I said originally, is that nobody's really engaging that line of business. I mean, they tend to look at it as cost and efficiency. I do see that changing. Several of the vendors have built adapters to CRM, but I think it's just the sales organization and the marketing organization really hasn't been exposed that much to RPA. Matter of fact, when I talk to colleagues, when I worked at my prior company, they looked at me cross-eyed when I started talking about robotic process automation. It's just not something that has been effectively engaged. Now, the good news is that some opportunities we're working on right now as a firm, more so in the mature markets. I often say that the North American market is still through a maturity phase, even though it's been 4+ years. The UK is starting to really look at that, and we have some clients actually that clearly see the value of taking those, we'll call them the most expensive assets you have, which is your sales organization because of what they do, and really applying it there in the what we'll call the lead to cash, but primarily the revenue generating activities, so that you free up your sales organization.
So let's really dig in and
Sure.
demystify it a bit, if you will.
Sure.
Let's talk specifically about, one area of that lead to cash, because that's obviously a huge
Right. It's a
spectrum
mountain.
across the business. So give us one piece of it that, we can break down. But let's dig into that piece of it, which is a revenue generating piece that we can tie something other to a cost savings from an impact analysis.
That really drives towards the product catalog. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to use an example of the OEM space because I have a relative who works in that space and deals with the pain of that. Really today, the pricing model is continuously changing. A lot of it is managed in spreadsheets. A lot of times in the OEM space, when I get a phone call, I better have the right pricing information, and I better be able to give it to the client on that call, or I'm going to lose that deal. It's that cutthroat because it's such a commodity industry. So when you think about the application of the fact that, as a matter of fact, in this particular case, they have a dedicated pricing analyst that all they do all day long is go out to all the vendors and pull that pricing information into a spreadsheet and then hand that updated spreadsheet to the sales reps. So when you think about that, two bad things can happen. Number one, you can't get the price in time, or worse, you quote the wrong price. So from a revenue generating activity, clearly you can see the value just from a process perspective of pulling that information, leveraging, process automation and putting that information in the right format so I can quickly identify that quote and identify the accurate one. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And let's explore that a little bit.
Sure.
Interestingly enough, John, I used to work at a pricing science company.
There you go.
That is what we did. So how do you balance the price that you're finding in the market that your competitors are, driving that commodity price at, and balance that against your ability to make margin at that price?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Now you're talking about calcs. So in this particular case, what you're doing is you're obviously adding a layer of margin to that component. But more importantly, you're talking to an aspect of the ability to say how competitive is that partner price versus what my competitor's offering. And a lot of times those price lists are published online. They're easy to find. So leveraging RPA to basically do comparisons in that space is also effective to make sure that I'm competitive on my quote.
Yes, I think you could also use a digital worker to help you identify the appropriate deal envelope to recommend back to your salesperson. Because I agree with you that if you give the wrong price on the call, you lose the deal. But that doesn't mean that the first price you give on the call should be your bottom price. And I see that accident being made a lot from a pricing perspective.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's where, if you look at it, going back to what you're saying and expand on that, as a manager, I have the ability through RPA to more accurately look at which of my sales reps are consistently at that line and which ones are being more competitive. It's even interesting further than that. If you look at the cycle activity, which again can be pulled from CRM, a lot of times what I'm challenged with is that a lot of this data is in multiple systems. So from a reporting perspective, if I can pull that information in one central area, I identify pretty quickly, comparatively to my reps that are closing, which ones are generating the most margin for the company and where maybe some education is required as just not consistently touching on that price.
Absolutely. Another interesting point to look at is your compensation plan and look at your pricing bands and how those pricing bands compare with respect to your compensation plan bands. Amazingly, you find a high correlation between those two. I'd like to talk a little bit about the marketing aspect of sell and upsell. You mentioned virtual, agents or call centers earlier, and I think cross-sell and upsell is an interesting area where you can, capture that person on the call, free up, what I hear, from others is free up that person to have a more meaningful conversation while the digital workforce is providing that behind the scenes support. How can a digital worker help with generating revenue in that setting as opposed to just helping the agent, do some of the back end work?
That is an excellent question, and I'm going to give you a real life scenario of something that I found fascinating. We had a prospective customer in the call center where, think of it as negotiating your DirecTV bill, right? I'm calling to renew and I want the best price I can get. They were able to leverage the combination of a chatbot and RPA to basically quickly look at the customer's profile and, without even them talking to an agent, present several options to the customer to choose. And so the whole negotiation of what's my package, instead of having to deal with an agent who has to look all that, even though it's being brought to them, this chatbot can quickly pull that information and give me some options. And then if I'm not satisfied, then I can escalate it. But as a basically CSR, it's awesome because I already know what we've provided to them during that conversation, and I'm way ahead of the game when I'm discussing it with the customer. That's pretty cool to me.
Very cool. And you already know what they don't want. So you can pass over that and offer them something that they do. Yeah,
and then you also know your bands, right? Because the chatbot isn't going to give you the cheapest price. It's going to follow the rules that you've preset for it. And then if the customer isn't happy with those options, then you got to find what your low band is. You can kind of get there. So it's very cool. It's very fast, and this was one of our UK clients that we got to see that done. It's a little bit different how they renew over there, but the principle and the model is no different here. It's really, really cool how this technology is being leveraged in the sales process. And same thing goes, by the way, on portals. So we look at web portals today. We have a client here that basically the customer, again, it's an OEM model, the customer goes in and basically requests the ability to buy a set of products that this customer is offering. It used to take the client 3 days to basically get the request through the web portal, get that over to finance, get basically a DMB report off that to understand their credit risk, and then go back and give them, hey, you're not only approved to shop, but here's your limit on spend. Now they can do that in literally a matter of, actually, it's less than a minute. So you're getting buying power faster, and Absolutely. You're not touching a human in the process.
Any metrics you can share as to how that's impacting the bottom line of their business?
I can a little bit. I want to be careful, but the bottom line is what they're seeing is they're onboarding. So if you took I can't give you a specific number, but you can figure it out. If you took the cost of time it takes between when somebody can actually start buying and they do, that brings my revenue in faster, obviously from a cycle time perspective. The other thing you have to remember is potential churn. If it takes me 3 days to find out, I might go somewhere else and buy that product.
Absolutely. Do you see any use cases for impacting customer satisfaction or net promoter in using a digital workforce?
Yes, I can, as a matter of fact. And we can go back to an example where that would be a good fit is going back to that model on, today, if you do book an engagement with American Airlines, if you talk to a rep on the phone, right after the call, they have an interesting net promoter score they use is, would you recommend working with this agent again? So it doesn't talk about the company. It talks about the actual experience I had with the agent. Well, if you think about that process where the person called for their DirecTV renewal and they went through that experience, they can quickly, basically, you're going to see an improvement because we're actually guiding the customer faster to get what they want. But you can also leverage that Net Promoter Score add-on to see, are we really giving the customer, are we learning from this? Are we giving the customer the right options? And that's where you can start to, even if you have enough data, start deploying some unique aspects of AI where it gets smarter on what the chat bot provides to particular customers based on certain profiles.
Okay, excellent. But that is very cross-functional in an organization. And a lot of times what we see is RPA, or intelligent automation, as it's, starting to be called, fitting into one business function. So finance a lot, right, John? I'm sure you see that a lot as well. Or you might see it sitting in HR because a different group has, sort of latched onto it. Or in a complex situation as a bank, for example, you might see it being used in commercial banking, but not in retail banking or, your mortgage lending area, as an example. So something that we just talked about, improving CSAT and Net Promoter Score, those are obviously things that span across organizations.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about how businesses get there, because I think that we see businesses falling into the silo approach. And,
exactly.
Yeah. So how do you get past that in order to achieve some of these, transformational, things that you're talking about?
Well, this is really interesting because one of the things I used to help clients a lot with is understanding how to leverage Net Promoter Score. And in a lot of cases, it gets used in the wrong way, which is in terms of I give you, 5 questions with the one to tell. And really what I want is just one answer. And that is basically from 1 to 10, how do you feel about doing business with our company? And then you can take that information where they can add additional input. You can leverage that and direct it to the right area of the business for training purposes, right? So that is clearly the right way if you wanted to be more cross-centric in the organization to leverage RPA to route that information. It's not workflow because we're pulling that data out, we're entering it or pulling from a spreadsheet, and we're getting it out of the email, and it's going to the right person to make a decision on, do we have a training issue in this particular area of the business? Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And let's talk a little bit about the intelligence that a digital worker could apply there to actually help the end user, the person that's receiving that data. Any insights there?
Yes, absolutely, because one of the common things that gets broken in Net Promoter Score is the calculation of it. So that particular digital worker can do the collection of those data points and give you the appropriate score, because a lot of times that gets messed up. And what you really want to do is make sure you have enough inputs on your Net Promoter Score, because sometimes people pass, but more importantly, are you calculating the average correctly? Because not that it's intentional, but we tend as humans, if we feel there's a score there that maybe was unmerited, we might drop that from the calc. And that's not necessarily intention of saying, I'm trying to make my department look better. It's just, this is unreasonable. This is off the spectrum. This shouldn't go into my calculation. So there's certain decisions being made on how you calculate it, what you calculate, that obviously a digital worker removes that bias, be it intentional or unintentional.
Or at least applies the same logic repeatedly every time.
Exactly. It's taking all the data, not selectively cherry picking, and more importantly, it knows how to do that calculation, because it's not that simple. You're taking an average of, a 1 to 10. You're not just simply adding it up and scoring it. You got to basically look at it in different pieces, and there's multiple calcs to that, as you know.
Yes. And it's so interesting to me when I see people say, oh, our net promoter score is, 97%. I'm like, you don't even understand how to calculate it because that's not possible.
Yeah, exactly. I've been there. I've had those conversations with clients before. I had my own business for 6 years. And when we talked about go-to-market performance, that marketing, I had certain market people that are like, we want to calculate this way. I'm like, that's fine, but here's the book from the guy that came up with it. You might want to read it and see how you accurately do that.
Absolutely. It's a fun calculation to look at, but you definitely do have to have some intelligence behind it. So I do see a lot of value in having a digital worker contribute to that process.
Yeah, more importantly, from a training aspect, as you get more and more data and more accurate data, I mean, we talk about this all the time, right, with intelligent automation. Number one is you want sufficient data, but number two, you want sufficient accurate data so your learning is appropriate. You're making the right decisions, because if you don't have those two pieces, you're going to get those discussions as we have a 97% NPS score, right? And more importantly, are you taking the points below it? Chick-fil-A is great at that, by the way. When you have a bad experience at Chick-fil-A, they jump on it, right? So for them to have that data quickly route to the correct store manager, instead of waiting a few days or even waiting a day, they potentially call you that day. That's the application of RPA that could even speed that experience up. But they go to make things right. But again, I think it's about getting that information accurate into the right store and faster.
Agree. So, John, talk to me a little bit about what executives need to be doing in order to support this transformation that will require a non-business function siloed approach to automation.
That's a great question. That goes back to the governance model. There's an element of change management. But more importantly, I think really is making sure you have a cross-functional exposure to it. Obviously, you need one executive sponsor. You can't have 20. But when you're putting your steering committees together, when you need to make sure, and by the way, this is one of the things that as a firm, we 100% see as a challenge to scale, and that is not educating the business on the right types of processes to automate and what RPA or digital workers can do for them. A lot of folks have an understanding in broad terms what it means, but they don't necessarily have an understanding of the application and what makes a good process. So you have to have those different departments exposed to some level of steering committee, but it can't just sit in where I see a lot of times it sits is in finance, right? And that makes sense because there's a lot of compliance things it can handle, but that's only one piece. If you really want to spread it across the organization, have two programs, that steering committee needs to have cross-representation, because it goes back to what I said. I think if more sales and marketing executives were exposed to how they can leverage this, they would jump at it. And the ironic thing, if you want to look at the cost per resource, it's highest on that front end, and it's revenue generating. It's a no-brainer. So it's not an issue of I don't want it. It's an issue of I don't want it because I don't understand what it can do for me. And I don't want you messing with my sales reps. But then when I say, well, look, your sales reps are spending 40% of their time entering stuff into the CRM that they don't need to, that's 40% of their time they're not selling. That becomes a very compelling and easy discussion to have, but I don't believe those discussions are happening enough because of the fact it's relegated to one area of the business.
Agree. It's really being pigeonholed as a back office, at least it has been. It's changing.
Well, it is. And I could compare that, being the fact I'm dating myself, but, when CRM first came out, CRM was really relegated as a back office tool where if you wanted to make changes, you had to go to IT and they owned it, right? And then over time, it moved to becoming a business tool where the business owns that. And I think if you want to scale RPA, what you're seeing is the successful organizations that do it are looking at it as a business tool, not something relegated in And there's nothing wrong with, IT obviously has to be involved in either case, but I need to be able to leverage the power of it in the business. I need it to be looked at as an extension of my team and how they can do things faster and better without waiting for, IT to get back to them on where this fits on the whole series of things they have to do. Matter of fact, Sean Dawson actually wrote a great article on the whole thing of where RPA applies to IT transformation. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the article more closely, you can clearly see that the real value is that the business is not waiting on you. They can do more, and IT is freed up to tackle the bigger projects. Because that's what happened in the early days, right? I'd have a request to change, talking about Lotus Notes back in the day. I needed something different, and I couldn't do it. I had to rely on somebody else to get back to me. And it always fell on the bottom of the floor versus other projects.
Yes, I like being in control of my own destiny as a knowledge worker as well. So it's giving power back to those individuals who, over the course of the last 50 years, have really become the mechanics again.
You know and understand
points.
Your processes better than anybody else in your department. Somebody that's not in your department doesn't necessarily understand, obviously, your processes as well, and doesn't understand why you do what you do. Just think, if I look at the vast number of companies I've worked with and worked for in my career, just the sales funnel approach alone is unique to that company. So you can't just slam something in or look at it in a book and say, here's your funnel stages. That doesn't necessarily apply to that business. So the more we can have the business involved and give them what they want, the way they do their work. Now, there's always room for process improvement, right? That's the whole aspect of change management. That's great. But don't take that away from me and kind of force fit my process to me. Give me more of a vested interest in RPA, and you'll see me adapt it even more.
Yeah, and that's the wonderful thing about it. It's super adaptable and very, very beneficial to the bottom line for businesses who are doing it. So last question.
Sure.
I'm curious if you can share with me what you think is the cleverest way in which you've seen a digital worker used.
Yeah, so this goes back to a really interesting point. So as a salesperson, if you think about it, you have a contact that you email for a meeting event. They invite 3 or 4 more people in that organization. This tool basically takes that particular additional contact and automatically pulls it out and populates it into the CRM. I won't say which one, for me. So think about how much time that takes for me to look into LinkedIn, to copy that information, to look at the company and populate that information into the tool. Now you can say, well, John, there's tools today where once you click the company name, you get the address and all that. Yep, that's not enough. I need the email address. I need the phone number, not just the corporate number. I need that specific information. And this tool was pulling that stuff out and populating it. That's a cool concept to me. That's a huge time saver.
It is. And by the way, it can use information about those 3 and your main contact to go and pull others that may be similar, or perhaps look at LinkedIn for level 1 connections of those individuals and see who else maybe you want to invite.
Exactly.
The sales and marketing arena is really untapped, and I look forward to it really embracing a digital workforce, in the next few years. I think that we're really going to see that trend.
There was one more thing you asked me that I didn't circle back to you on, and it was the power of the tool RPA in marketing, the digital worker. And this you've experienced as well. You go to a trade show, you collect all those leads from the trade show, they send you a spreadsheet of all the contact information. Then somebody has to grab that information, usually it's a marketing analyst, pulls that information, enters it into the CRM, and then has to distribute it. That is a painstaking, high chance of failure to basically get that information in. And they always say you can upload, etc. It never works well. It just never works well. And a digital worker will do that more accurately and faster than any tool. And that's a perfect application in getting leads to sales faster. Because the longer they sit on the shelf, the more that conversation is forgotten and the colder that lead gets.
Yes, agree. And so in my team, customer experience, we own our reference program. We use digital workers to interface with our sales team so that they can make requests for assets that match their selling scenario and where they are in the cycle. Because as you know, some stories are better from an awareness, down the funnel consideration, preference. And it's been really successful. And digital worker was easy to train to do that job. And it's been very successful. And you're right, there's other products out there that can do that. But companies are already running so many applications in their application stack that if you can use it.
It goes back to my 8 different technologies that I'm having to deal with if I don't have RPA.
Exactly. So if a digital worker can step in and do the role without, encumbering additional technology, to the stack of the business, I think that is a huge benefit in addition to having the work done.
Exactly.
So, John, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot. And for how to connect with John, guys, check in the show notes. His contact information will be there. And thanks again for joining us this week on Generation Digital Workforce.
You've been listening to Generation Digital Workforce. If you want to hear more about RPA, AI, and other cognitive technologies that are shaping the future of work, join us next time as we continue to go deeper on these topics with industry innovators and experts. To make sure you never miss a future episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. And if you've liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. It's one of the best ways to help more people find valuable content. For show notes and more info, visit us at blueprism.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.